We are remembering the life and legacy of former Secretary of State Colin Powell. A funeral service was held today at Washington's National Cathedral. President Biden and First Lady Jill Biden were in attendance, as well as former presidents Barack Obama and George W. Bush. Powell died last month at age 84 due to complications from COVID. He was fully vaccinated, but was battling blood cancer, which doctors say compromised his immune system. General Powell made history as the first black person to serve as Secretary of State and chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. At the service, his son, Michael, got emotional when speaking about his father's legacy.
My father made a monumental difference. He lived. He lived well. I've heard it asked, are we still making his kind? I believe the answer to that question is up to us. To honor his legacy, I hope we do more than consign him to the history books. I hope we recommit ourselves to being a nation where we are still making his kind.
For more on this, I want to bring in CBS News national security correspondent David Martin. David, welcome. Great to have you with us. You covered General Powell when he served as chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He made history in that role, as well as being the first African-American Secretary of State. Tell us about the impact he's had on this country and the legacy he's leaving behind.
Well, it's hard to recapture the moment of the first Gulf War back in 1991, particularly in the wake of the debacle in Afghanistan. But at that time, the United States was still dealing with the Vietnam hangover. It did not have confidence in its armed forces. And Colin Powell stepped forward as chairman of the Joint Chiefs and was the face of those armed forces during that very brief and very successful first war against Iraq. And he sort of embodied this new confidence. And his briefings were must-see TV. And he completely overshadowed the Secretary of Defense at the time, Dick Cheney. And it was a huge shift in the mood of this country. You know, the president was George H.W. Bush, and he's the one who, of course, was the commander-in-chief and ordered the military action, which we ended up calling Desert Storm. But it was Colin Powell who embodied it. And I think, certainly on my part, that is what I remember most about his career.
Remember those times, and the phrase shock and awe was used frequently during the attacks in Iraq. Did that have any root in General Powell's belief that, you know, military action should be decisive and swift?
Actually not. Shock and awe was a catchword or catchphrase for the second Gulf War. And we know that there was shock and awe in those opening nights, but then it turned into a very long, hard slog. One of the sayings of his that was most repeated during the Iraq War is he warned the president, we play by crate and barrel rules here. You break it, you own it. And we broke Iraq, we broke the Iraqi army, and then we ended up owning it for years to come while we dealt with that insurgency.
Sort of prescient looking ahead at Afghanistan, isn't it?
It is. But I do not think that he was reluctant about going into Afghanistan. You know, he was Secretary of State on 9/11, and everybody's blood was up, and including his. I think he was much more cautious about going into Iraq 2 years later in 2003. And that, of course, is when he delivered the speech that will haunt him forever to the United Nations, in which he made the case for the intelligence, which turned out to be wrong, but which reputedly said that Saddam Hussein was hiding weapons of mass destruction.
And David, as we've mentioned, he served in many different roles, from National Security Advisor to Secretary of State. What does it say about General Powell that he was able to hold so many different positions?
Well, I think it goes to his skill in dealing with people. I mean, when you're chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, you can order people around. You can bark out orders, and people will come running. But when you're National Security Advisor, not so much. You're trying to get all the different branches of government to work together to come up with a policy. And he was just very, very good at that. And one thing he was really good at was time management. With him, meetings started on time and they ended on time. And he just went through his day like clockwork. And when you think of all the emergencies and pseudo-emergencies that occur during the course of a day in the United States government, that's an achievement in itself. Then, of course, when he became Secretary of State for President George Bush, he basically was out of sync with the Bush administration. They were just more hardline than he was. And that was embodied, of course, by his former boss and colleague at the Defense Department, Dick Cheney, who was Secretary of Defense when Powell was chairman of the Joint Chiefs and was vice president when Powell was Secretary of State. And they just did not see eye to eye on a number of issues. And Cheney usually had the last word with the president. So that left Powell as sort of the odd man out. And he and his friend Richard Armitage, the Deputy Secretary of Defense, left at the conclusion of the first 4 years of the Bush administration.
And, you know, General Powell was someone who was always well respected by both political parties in Washington. We know that that is a tricky feat. What was it about him that enabled him to garner that type of respect?
I think he gave everybody respect. I remember there was a Senate staff member of the Senate Armed Services Committee who was pushing this reform initiative that was just hugely unpopular with the Secretary of Defense, who then was Caspar Weinberger. And Caspar Weinberger was a very haughty man. And this Senate staffer had to go into Weinberger's office and try to persuade him of the merits of this reform proposal, and he knew he was going to get his head handed to him. So he showed up, and who greets him but Weinberger's military assistant, Colin Powell. And the staffer said, "Nobody was ever nicer to me in my life than Colin Powell was before that meeting." I mean, he still went in and got his head handed to him, but Colin Powell could have easily taken on the demeanor of his boss, the Secretary of Defense, and been equally dismissive of this staffer, but he wasn't. And you heard Madeleine Albright refer to that in her speech. She said she went into those first White House meetings when she was the U.S. ambassador to the UN. He was a four-star general, the hero of Desert Storm, with a chest full of medals, and here she was, a woman with a little pin on her dress. And he gave her all the respect that her office merited, and that was the beginning of their friendship, although they disagreed on many policy subjects. He gave her respect.
That is a lovely story there. We will end it on that note. David Martin at the Pentagon, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Sure thing.